Okay, cool. And we are live. All right, so hi everybody. Today we're live with Jimmy Wayne Chung. Uh, and Jimmy will be giving us a presentation that's really interesting about perceive um, perceive reality and its autonomous agents. And I met Jimmy through a few of his previous works. We actually seen like your work together where you gave a presentation at a workshop about like agents and like stuff that you're developing with inside of architecture with agents. So that was really cool. It's a really interesting approach. Jimmy is a multifaceted professional who has served as an architectural designer, researcher, and educator. He earned his MS in design theory, pedagogy, and architectural technologies from SCI-Arc, where he was awarded a Post Grad Thesis Prize, and he is currently pursuing a Ph.D. at the Share Lab at the University of Florida. His research delves into the pivotal role of representation in architectural design. His research explores the transformative impact of semiotics, media theory, and simulation on architectural design within the context of the rapidly evolving landscape of artificial intelligence. So that's gonna be like really interesting, Jimmy. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. I'm sure a lot of people also want to see what you're researching on. So the floor is yours, Jimmy, and we'll go into a conversation afterwards. So welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me. And so let me share my screen. Okay, so I'll start my presentation. My title is Perceived Reality and its Autonomous Agent. And this just has something I've been thinking after this kind of AI trend in architecture. And then, so to begin with, let's discuss the concept of perceived reality in the context of artificial intelligence. And in the age now, almost everything we are perceiving or we are receiving through the digital device. So we have a lot of information coming from the internet constantly. And then, so our understanding of the reality is like continuously morphing and reshaped by this interaction of the information. And whenever external information comes into a closed system or an environment, the divergence appear, and depending on the receiver's culture or educational background, the same messages might be interpreted in multiple ways to construct a new perspective on this existing world. So some reality might be overlapping or intersecting, and then some might be has no relationship at all. So some might inside another. So these are kind of multi-system replace our material world to become a new reality we are experiencing today. Everyone has their own belief or what the truth is in this world. And so as he told Stereo writes in the article, a sea of data, not seeing anything intelligible is a new normal. So the human vision is gradually to be replaced by this machine vision that to be a new way we interact with the information or we communicate through this machine agency in between to become as a filter to change the information or to change the way you see the world. So today's information is not meant, it's not completely meant for human to communicate, but as a signifier to trigger a larger system of autonomous mechanical things. And maps are another vehicle to for information for us to understand the world. So they are maps are the models of a fraction of the reality of a fraction of the world. They are abstract, representational, informative, but at the same time also really political. They contains a story of a place, and then but at the same time also alter the reality based on who draw a map or the cartography want to show to the larger publics. So they are kind of like a story generator that leads us to navigate this fictional reality, and these are the truths, or the story we are believing becomes the reality we are experiencing. And it depends on how the reality is being projected. This projection will change the real. So like in a map, we can know the real size of the continent is different from the truth. We are living this kind of modified reality. And so we are already in the simulation as John Baudrillard described. We are no longer experiencing a world in reality. Instead, we experience everything through media representation. And so there are four stages of this representation reflection. We have the images of the tools of a certain event, certain objects, and we have a model, or we have a illusion of this object, like means we add new meanings on top of the original media. And there's another like illusion is like we have the replica of the original, so it becomes a new entities, and in the end it becomes a pure simulacra, as Jean Boulevard Baudrillard described. Is the original meaning is being replaced by this new digital content, and then no one knows what it was before, but only know the new kind of new generate truths from this kind of digital simulation. So like the Apple, when we talk about Apple today, the Apple becomes more like a product, not the image, the fruit itself. So image is still same, but the meaning changes. And then and so the first project I'm showing today is a modern platform called OWL. OWL is a plugin that can apply to any software, or it can run independently as you see here. And this is kind of taking the ideas of how do we perceive these images, how do we interpret the meaning of form, and then I kind of accelerate this phenomena in the modern platform to see how can we model from this platform if we just simply sample the images. And yeah, so this is just a face if you can see. And the machine might see different ways. So I was wondering if this differentiation can stimulate the creativity, or creativity is coming from here. And but always not a search engine like Google. It's more like a filtering machine. So as we know in the Google, we search based on this maybe time-based, location-based, or relevance-based of the content. And then it can categorize architecture into type, or locational based on the areas. And then, but this way of sampling or studying a reference kind of because of this recommendation algorithm in the system, it might fall into the rabbit hole. They constantly seeing the same things. So we have this kind of new digital aesthetic coming from the search algorithm. And yeah, so this is just a system of the OWL, sampling the architecture just by the color, shape, and texture. And then yeah, this is now applied to Maya and Blender. So you can see, you can just as you model the geometry, the image shows the precedent, and then you can sample the texture from the images to further change the algorithm. So the texture will stimulate the algorithm to showing more similar images. And these are some output from the tools. That the object itself doesn't mean anything. It's just a aggregation from this practice. And then I'm going over time a little bit, but maybe 5 more minutes, I'll finish the presentation. So the second project I'm showing here is another small modern tools I made. But this, I was thinking about what is the role of human figure in the architectural representation after I've seen a lot of AI generative images, we can see the human figures kind of distorted or becomes the backgrounds of the architecture. The architecture itself, the object itself becomes the main subject in the drawing. If we look at a painting or more traditional architectural drawing, we see the human figure kind of was a way to guide the the audience to see, to go into the story, to know the space inside this 2D representation. And I think a lot of us have seen these kind of cutout images in all the computational renderings. You can see these figures is repeating appear in a lot of different rendering images. And we even have this Sana cutout figure you can place on your rendering. So, and then when Le Corbusier draw this human figure, it was more like a measuring units to measure the size and then to reference how big the building is or become. And then, but today, as in a digital tool, we this kind of human or individuality of humans kind of remove. We treat human as more like a larger entity, and because maybe the privacy issue to protect, and then, but we have this simulation system that can simulate the scroll movements, and so machines kind of seeing human as different in different way, and then this human becomes another factor change the way we design space, but it's more engineering thinking. So in this small platform, I was thinking if we can use human as a measuring unit instead of looking at human as a larger group, look at more like individual person. It has individual personality, and then we measure the perception of the human, and then further to embedded this perception into the tools to see this interaction between the space you are modeling, and also to see how agent responds to your model. And so this kind of like small experiment to see how can we use this interaction to design new space and further evaluate the space in a non-engineer way, but more like in phenomenological way to model this human behavior. So all of these human movement might not be accurate, but it's a assumption of certain kind of group of people will use the space. And that's all. That's my presentation.
Okay, awesome. Cool, Jimmy. Thank you for that. That was really interesting. So we can kind of like a little bit dive into a little bit more of your background. So you actually you were a practicing architect before this, right?
Yeah.
And then you kind of got involved maybe a little bit more on the tech side now. So you kind of took that route. Maybe talk a little bit about your background, like where did you practice architecture and how that kind of evolved to where you are now?
Okay. So my background, I work as an architecture designer in Japan, Tokyo, and then and before started doing technology stuff, my design approach was more analog, more like traditional thinking to physical modeling and material experiment. Like physical material, we study because my educational background before technology was more like artistic training. We do painting and then like in charcoal or a lot of like body movement to study how we inhabit a space and how those painting in like through charcoal or watercolor can become inspiration to discover new space. And then my experience in Japan was mainly I was in a position that helped to transition this physical model into digital, and then to be able to make a construction drawing on the side. So I started to get more interested in this kind of technical way to think. But you can see from the tools I proposing, I'm still really uh, in those kind of traditional thinking of how can we find new inspiration or stimulate creativities outside of the tool itself. So not being limited by the tool we are having right now, but you can develop your tools and then to also to think about how what are the constraints and then how can we like misuse the tool or use the tool in different way. Mhm.
Yeah. So that's cool because I think one of the things that you showed in your presentation was the idea of like, yes, how do you represent architecture using these tools, right?
Yeah.
And some of the, I guess, like recent tech advances with like the large language models or the image generators is that you can use them as a way to, I don't know, take like a base form that you can manipulate. So it's like more sculptural, but then it adds this layer of representation that is, a model that's been trained on a wide set of images and then inputs that representation on top. So how do you see this as a way, since this is kind of like the work that you're doing, how do you see this as a way to develop novel architectural strategies or representations?
You mean those AI tools?
Yeah, so like to be able to use the AI tools themselves to kind of create like a new representation essentially.
Uh, I think we still the like for this tool we still requires a lot of post editing. I
Hmm.
guess after the generate
Yeah.
from AI, I'm not sure how much is Photoshop, but I guess those kind of um like if you are not engaged in the data curation or data training, then the post processing will be a way to kind of inject your own like think architecture thinking into the output, and then but like to think of a lot. Another thing in my presentation I try to state is that uh, how do we represent and then because a lot of these large language models training in English or training from the Western architecture data sets, and then but I think those kind of one like in a presentation I say one images of one object might contain different meanings or becomes another meanings in different cultures. So how do we have this in the generative AI is also something I'm curious about it. And then yeah, so I guess still I'm not sure about if it answers the question of representation, but I guess the question I want to ask more is how do we uh, examine the data set and how do we label things and how do we like because labeling the architecture as an object is easy, but if you want to go to the more details, like all of those small elements inside architecture can the meaning can change depends on the the context of the whole architecture or the context of the culture, the context of the a lot of like outside factor that can influence how we label things. So uh, I we but a lot of generative images we can see now has a certain style. Maybe you can call
Yeah.
it style. But how do we escape from this style, uh, or can you escape from the style without retraining data set? Maybe you incorporate other things when you generate. You are not really typing anything related to architecture language, but you have other domain knowledge or domain language that can be incorporated to create a new. Maybe that's the new experiment can try.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of kind of like if you're like I often think about, for example, that as architect, designers, artists, when we use like AI, we're essentially looking for something that's like novel, for something that's kind of like more original or more new, right?
Yeah,
And it's usually like the designer or the, human input, let's say, that can distinguish that from what is being generated. And you talked about kind of like this notion of like the perceived reality and how that's kind of embedded in culture, right? And dependent on your perception of like, I guess you have like images or like the diagram of the map. You have like a perception of reality. So maybe talk a little bit about how you think that applies to the notion of creating architecture, right? Because you talk about like semiotics and things like that, and that's your focus. So how
Mm,
does that apply to the creation of architectural form or design?
yeah, because for me, I think there's no like really like normal not novelty in terms of in a design field. Like everything new or everything you feel interesting is actually is a combination or aggregation of different ideas or from different object, different culture. And then and then I guess the difficulty is how do you uh modify something you or everyone have already seen to something new, and then that that for example the invention of the barcode is from the accident that the inventor was like in a beach, and then when he used his hand to do the symbol like barcode, he suddenly has a ideas or inspiration to design the new system of to be able to encode the messages or to, and then so I guess this like how how human find the creativity is really interesting subject for me. In like this goes to back my original training of the artistic training. How do you find inspiration from these materials? And the materials is like uh, I think there's an argument saying that drawing on paper is different from drawing computer, but I feel
Hmm.
two are the same, but just the material resistance is different. So some people might more attached to these uh, physical material resistance that can stimulate your brain to think about more to connect the irrelevant stuff to become the new. In this generation, I guess we are more familiar with the digital. But the problem is, or the difficulty is in the digital. The limitation is more restrict than in the physical materials, because in a paper you can do all the operation, do all the manipulation. Just if you have like two hands, you can do everything. But in computers, you require a coding skill to be able to intervene the tools to make new. So I guess now with the like Copilot or ChatGPT, we have the ability that you can um, kind of play with all the tools, or you can modify all the tools in different purpose, or you can make your own tools. And but still, those kind of material resistance from the the medium you are using still there. So I guess this kind of, for example, in computer, the resistance might be the limitation of the code or the computing power, and then what you can do with that. And so this kind of resistance, I guess, is where we can get the inspiration, but it's not that
Mm.
direct. Like you can find an answer from this, and then yeah,
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think that's kind of like your proposal of what you were doing with the owl tool, right? Where you're trying to essentially come up with a way that you can interact in a frictionless way, right? Or reduce some sort of friction between like a 3D model and like these image generators. Um, and now I think as these techs kind of evolve a little bit more, do you see them essentially that friction is going to be reduced, and then we can have tools that operate kind of like at a more real-time pace, and that allows us to kind of go back to like what you were saying of the friction of the paper, right? Where you can just in a frictionless manner like draw and things like that, but now you can operate digitally in a much more frictionless manner.
yeah. I hope that is a trend that we all going back to to more like a manual operation in the design. So I feel it's, and then technology is a kind of assistant to help you to maybe when you change something, you have a ready construction say there. But I feel that that is not is less possible to happen because I feel uh, young designer or a new trend right now is people looking for something you can immediately get the output with one button. So you set
Hmm.
up your constraint like all the web-based AI assisted platform we are seeing right now is a tool that can get real-time feedback and then efficiency for decision making, but seems like the designer doesn't really need to go into um, doesn't need to put the effort to do the design, but more like select the output from the the platform, the tools. For me, I still I guess I wish or I more I prefer to stay in the designer still have control in every state of process. This real time interaction will be uh, just to it's like a feedback system to give you the feedback about either is more scientific evidence to help you to propose your design or more inspirational to help you to sell your design. And then I think uh, yeah, this real time interaction is still yeah very important to for us to in across any kind of platform. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because the whole thing about like customizability as you go as a designer, and I think this is kind of like for like the people that know how to code or like they know how to incorporate these things. And there's like a rise, like I feel like what you mentioned is kind of interesting because there's like a rise of these platforms or tools that are like one click. You're gonna use as many few clicks to generate some output. And then you have tools that are working more like comfy UI, kind of like the Grasshopper interface, where you can piece now things together. And now the output that you get at the end might be a lot different now. Like now you can modify the in-between steps, but it requires a little bit more of that play and like figuring out how things work. Now, do you think like designers or people that are, let's say, in architecture design school, they should start playing with these tools and understand them? Or do you think that this is kind of like maybe to those who are interested that they should try those out, or like architects in general shouldn't really think about this and just focus on architectural things?
I think first everyone should try first, and then to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least yeah, just like I feel at least just like a Rhino or a SketchUp is a new tools, and then you're gonna try to see like which tool matches your demand. That's like someone prefers SketchUp, someone prefer
Mm.
Rhino, but there's no like but we still design. I'll say like in the school we still design a really traditional way of thinking. We still look at reference to think about architecture theory, and then we have physical model, and then and yeah, just like digital tools just part of the design process. And I guess the current tool we have right now is also part of the design process. It cannot be uh at least for me cannot be like a completely substitute the whole design workflow. And then so I think it's worth to try it, and then to see I'm still in a position that to was is worth to see how can you change it or how can you use it in your design workflow. And then I know Comfy UI is already really sophisticated for you to customize the output you have, and then you can design a customized node, and then to generate the output that's unique to you. So I guess and Comfy UI will be really I guess it will be a useful tools for designer in the ideation process.
Mhm. Now, in one of the things that I guess like the United mentioned ideation process, it seems like a lot of these tools, image generators and things like that, are kind of like part of the inspiration or like the ideation and kind of like this early stage process. And you showed kind of like the Google search, right? Like how does Google kind of classify the sets of styles and images and things like that? Um, So they kind of like give us like some sort of filter, right? Of like
Yeah.
what we can see, right? What we perceive. So do you see I guess like is there a way to break from that bubble, right? Like from that kind of filter, or how do you see that system operating essentially for designers?
Yeah. I'm not sure if we need to break that filter or I feel the filter is kind of just I feel like every design practice or every architecture office they have their own way of doing things, and then those
Hmm.
are kind of the filter they create inside their internal system. Like you have a construction company you partner with for all the time, so you have standardized workflow to do certain kind of building, and that in a way for me is already kind of design design a style or design a way to design a building, and then so like this search engine or generative AI, this kind of filter is more like in the ideational stage, but eventually you need to go into the construction. So still limited by what kind of materials or modular you can get, or how do you reduce the cost by penalize the the geometry, and then so I guess instead of like break the filter of all different layers, I feel how do you find design a pipeline or workflow to create a filter that is like fit into your belief. I like to say like your face of architecture, or how would you like what's your voice in this kind of style generate trend, and then so yeah, so I'm not really uh, engaged too much in this image generate or ideation generate tools. I'm more interested in the part that can how do we accelerate, or how do we have an efficient way to realize the building in the physical world. Even though I work a lot in digital, but I still think how do we realize in the physical will be is like important. So
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That's where you would have the most impact, right? You build the take the digital to the physical. Um, so Jimmy, maybe let's move into like the agents simulation stuff because that
yeah.
I think that applies a little bit to how you translate digital to the real world in a simulated environment. You talked about the idea of using the human as a measuring unit, and that's kind of like been historical thing from architecture, from
Mhm.
Vitruvius to Corbu. So maybe talk a little bit about like your process for creating that experiment and how did what I guess like outputs or results did you get from that?
Okay. So that project, yeah, started from like my personal like experience or question. Like whenever I go to a space, I feel like how like more like emotional attachment to the space is more important to me. But this emotional attachment is hard to quantify, or is like varies depends on people. But the ballet project kind of want to just emphasize just focusing on my like personal perception of a space, and it could be so that project I did with a business school with a student from South Korea, and so we just so the last slide I show is the different agent they train in the workshop, and then how the way we did is we went out to the public space to observe how people behave, or more you can say to ask students to observe what kind of behavior they are more interested in. So and then so after the thinking was when they after they train the agent, when they and then if they use those agents to design a space, the space becomes a place that invite those kind of people to come, to attract those kind of people, because the space is based on those training data. And then this kind of if it remind me like when we design the building or when we draw a plan, we always make assumption of how the user will use. And then, but mostly we draw on a plan or we based on our experience, like maybe we design a house for the single family. We just kind of assume how they will use the space. But most of the case, that kind of assumption or prediction is not really working well. So you get a lot of complaint from the client saying this doesn't work, it doesn't match their own style, even though you do a survey or have a conversation about how
Yeah.
they use the space, but sometimes people don't really understand themselves, or maybe the interaction between the husband and wife create a new friction, so they change the dynamic of the space. And this kind of human interaction is kind of intrigued me. And then I was trying to see if we can duplicate it in a digital space. And then
Mhm.
so that kind of differentiate from the pedestrian simulation or cross simulations based on a group of people or how people move across the building. So here I was more focusing on more intimate scale to see how can we yes study a space. But the output from workshop is like the feedback was, or we didn't really have enough time to train well. So loss
Mhm.
agent behave weirdly, but still interesting to see how student uh, change the design based on how those agent move. And then there's a
Yeah.
lot of like pre-assumptions kind of fail because the agent doesn't really move as student was expecting to. So, but there was some interesting part is that some students start to, instead of changing design, they start to changing the, the parameter of the agent. So they train agent in different way. So they kind of
Mhm.
modify the individuality of each agent, and then as opposed to changing design. And that is strange for me. But but if you think that way, it's kind of the designer has an assumption of what kind of user they want to invite to the space. And yeah, so that was like the observation from the workshop, and then also the yeah why I start to do this experiment.
Yeah. And do you see, like, for example, if you were to scale it up and like actually get like a nice little train run, like multiple, agents or spaces, do you find this as something that can yield kind of like, I guess like the idea is like, right, to figure out how to either this what you assume that the agent would do correspond to the simulation, or does the simulation yield like new results or new opportunities that you might not have thought about before? Um, and so do you see that as kind of like, we can potentially use that in architecture to test what we design? Or is that something that you have, an interest in? Or how do you see that idea of simulating agents within like architecture helping design or construction?
Yeah, I think this simulation exercise I did raise a lot of questions, but I don't see it is possible to apply to real design scenario situation, because I feel there's a lot of like psychological effect from this practice. Like I got a question like why you train more male as a male than female? Why you like did you take the aestheticity into account, or just a lot of like this social justice question
Mm,
coming from here? And then I guess in the reality, if you want to simulate this human behavior in the building space, the more general group of people you have, the more uh, satisfied outcome you will get. Like for most of people, that's the ideal solution, because you cannot really answer all these questions unless the space is designed specifically to a group of people And then so that's the PowerPoint challenges. So I guess it's a good experiment to be able to see all these questions from the exercise. Even though
Mhm.
I only have like really simple figure, like there's no, you cannot see the nationality, you cannot, it's like a
Yeah.
red and blue, but I still get question why the male is blue color, why the female is like red color. This kind of like cultural, yeah, this made me start to again to reflect the ideas of how do we label things, how do we train, like even this small human figure create this kind of a lot of controversy of these label questions, and then so if we see those images, there's more questions can be discussed.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really interesting because I do see like a trend where people are using kind of like video games or in a video game approach where they can use like something like ChatGPT and embed characters with like a certain personality, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then have them run through like a simulation, right? And I saw a paper recently where they were trying to like simulate how like a hospital might work. Like you have the patients, the doctors. So how do you move these agents through that and see if they can learn things the same way like a doctor would in the
Mm-hmm.
real world? Um, so I think maybe that's another opportunity. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's something that you thought about, like how to incorporate maybe like this, ChatGPT style models and then embed personalities more similar, let's say, or more aligned with like how humans in the real world might be.
yeah. I think all the model are like not 100% precise, but all are useful. And then yeah, I guess a lot of like model or this simulation try to optimize like what we can get from here. Even for the hospital, I believe there's not just in reality not just really optimize every like how many patients
Mm.
you can treat. Maybe there's a lot of sociology issues in the, yeah, but I guess as a designer or architect, the optimization might be the benefits we can get from these simulations. Yeah. As a researcher, I'm
Yeah.
more intrigued by these non quantifiable factors. How can we at least a little bit include it a little bit into the design process?
Yeah. So do you see kind of like I guess you see them as essentially these processes or this kind of like AI collaborate approach of processes being input into like the design process of like architecture and then being able to get either like metrics or something that's quantifiable that would give you like data to drive more of the design or test hypothesis of design.
Yeah, yeah,
So I would, yeah, cool. So that's interesting. I mean, that's kind of I would think that that's where I guess like AI opens up like a little bit of these opportunities to be able to do those types of experiments and then see how they can help in the design process. Um,
yeah. Recently, I've seen a kind of research experiment that someone is using AI to as a pedagogical tool to as a like critics in a school to
mm,
give student feedback, and then but after giving the feedback, they ask AI to generate the better design based on this feedback. So it kind of becomes a loop that AI constantly evaluate the design based on the first input from the student, and then just evolve a lot of generation. But in there's a so you have two AIs that talking to
mm.
each other. One is a teacher, one is a student, and then it becomes a question about what is the education right now. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, those kind of experiments also interesting to see how do we are are we still teaching, like should we still teaching architecture in the same way as in like critic feedback like this kind of module?
Mhm. Interesting. So Jimmy, now let's move on to like I guess what your most recent work is focused on. So maybe talk a little bit about that and then we'll close after that.
Okay, so my recent work is still focusing on so in the first the first the two projects I present today, the first one is focusing on how the images change how we design, and then the images with the images and objects. And the second is more like you remove the objects from the tools, but you introduce the human factor, inside, and then the human kind of shape the objects. And then the third project I'm working on more like language and form. So
Hmm.
how is like if you have a larger entity of a structure, a buildings, you can name the building as a style, the whole building as a style. But maybe each part of building or each segment is maybe you have a pipe that is not really stylized, is just a product that is an accessory of a buildings. But those kind of small element also is a form. So everything has a form or has a shape, you can have a meaning or you can name it. And then so my current project now is interested in how do we, so I have a larger structure and I slice the structure into a parts, and then how do we see those parts? How do we label those? And after we label those with the design languages, and then we kind of train these models to regenerate the new models. And then there's a meaning change if this same element is being placed in different contexts. The context here is different structure. So if I so I'm currently working on training a 3D generator that contains different elements that has different labels based on the designer's inputs, and then just try to see what are the potentials to see this, and then also reflect the ideas of how different phone can be different meanings for different user in different contexts.
Yeah. Okay. And that would relate more to the idea of like exploring architectural elements, right? Or essentially within a architectural project or something like that, right?
Yes, yes, and there's a conference called Play Model in ETH Zurich,
Mm.
and then so I will present this project in a conference, and then that is next week. Yeah,
Okay, awesome.
so that will
Well,
be more detailed.
yeah, yeah, awesome. And we will like post it on Instagram so people can check it out. Awesome. So Jimmy, we're up to the hour. So, do you have like any final words or advice for like young people or people that are kind of looking at the field right now and they're seeing all this happening with AI? What would you say to them to like think about with all the changes that's currently happening?
I I also always feel this is a difficult question to answer, and then I feel for me I'm still really kind of old school designer, so I'm still really think like just try all the tool, and then but I guess the young designer right now is not really I don't know, doesn't really like uh doesn't really attach to the building or architecture. They are more looking for, I don't know, the entertainment or fiction through these image generations. So but I don't know, I guess if the main subject is still related to architecture, I guess you must try all the tools, but at the same time go back to more old school like architecture theory or philosophy to think about how we inhabit a space, and then come back to the tool again to think about how can we change these tools, or because these tools are from the computer science, they are more interested in how do we duplicate these words, or how do we use these tools to create more autonomous like environment. But as a designer, I guess we can have another vision to see the future. It doesn't need to be all science fiction.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Jimmy, so much for this. This was really enjoyable, and really interesting work. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what you're working on. I'll check out the Share Models conference in ETH, and we'll post the link to that. So thank you again for being a part of this. And yeah, looking forward to seeing more of your work, Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Daniel.
All right. All right. See you guys. Bye, Jimmy.